Interested workers in the Netherlands. Geef een gott klap.
I just will start, and I see some people coming back. I hope you all enjoyed lunch. I did actually. And well, thank you first of all for the introduction, but also for being here, for the invitation. To present some of our work we did in the Netherlands over the last years about the role of the employer. And also to be here on this special event of 15 years VIRK. And yesterday we already met and I heard a bit more already about what VIRK is doing and also kind of services they offer. And in some aspects, it's really related to what we are doing in the Netherlands as well, but also there are a lot of differences. And I will tell a bit more about that at the start of my presentation, because I think you need to know a bit more to understand also the findings we have and the recommendations we made based on the results. But before doing that, it's also good to, in the introduction already, it's mentioned that I'm a professor in occupational medicine. I work at a university medical center in Groningen, which is in the northern part of the Netherlands. And well, I work in a hospital, and in particular, we do our research in collaboration with insurance and occupational physicians. These are two professions which are not similar. These are different physicians. One, the occupational health physician, is helping during the return to work process. I will tell more about that later on. The insurance physician, he works at the Social Security Institute. So he or she has the responsibility for the assessment for doing the assessment related to a disability claim. And within the context of the clinical setting, working also with medical students, my work in particular focus also on evidence-based medicine of these professionals, but we also work with the organizations they work at, so the Occupational Health Services and the Social Security Institute, but also with other professionals they work together with, like physiotherapists, psychologists, all working also together in a team, which I think is similar to here. I would like to start my presentation with a personal story. And when I come here to Iceland, I was preparing, of course, I already prepared my slides. But I was also thinking about the role of the employer, and it's good to realize that employer is different levels within an organization. So you can think about the management level, the human resource manager, for example, but also the supervisor or the line manager. And in case of my situation, after finishing my master in Groningen, I continued with a PhD project. So I started with 4 years to be trained to become a researcher. And after a year, I got ill. I was really sick. I had problems with my pancreas. Well, that's really a difficult issue. And I also stayed for a long time in the hospital, which was also my employer. So I was really close, connected to the work where I was also doing my research. But most of the time, I was just staying at the hospital, in the hospital bed. And unfortunately, I had to be on sick leave for many months, actually. At the end, it was 1.5 years. But during the whole process, there was the professor, my supervisor, who was really staying in contact with me and helping me, and also together with the co-workers, with the other students who were also doing their PhD. And that helped me, but also give me the opportunity to continue with doing my research after I recovered and I could finish my PhD. I need a bit more time, but overall it was 5 years, and then I succeed and defend my thesis. Realizing that if at that time there was not that professor who helped me and motivated me, but also listened to the needs and the wishes I had, that I would not stay here today, because it was a really important first step in my career, and later on I became a professor, but therefore you of course need to finish your PhD. Nowadays, I'm a professor, and I have a team of researchers. And it is, for me, it is sometimes really difficult if one of my researchers are sick listed. How can I help them? I can do that emotionally, of course, and I'm being in contact. But if we really talk about to accommodate work, it is difficult, also for myself. What can I do, and what are the right steps to make? That is one of the reasons why we started this project. Well, not of course the only thing, but in general, we heard from many supervisors, employers, but also from occupational physicians that it is often a struggle. And it's not that the employers are not motivated, but they do not know what kind of support they can offer and what is the right thing to do. In the next, 45 minutes, I think, I will tell more about the following things. The most important message for today is to give you a deeper understanding of the role in the employer in the return to work process in the Netherlands. And as I said, I will start with explaining a bit more about the Dutch system and how it is organized and what the role of the employer is. Then I will go deeper into the results we find in telling you more about the different types of support and also the characteristics related to the employer support. And then we will see how much time there's left, but then I will end with a take-home message, and maybe if there's still some time, I will tell a bit more about the other projects we are also doing, because in my field we're not only focusing on the employer, but for example also on other actors, stakeholders in the context of a sick-listed worker. In particular, I can maybe tell a bit more about another project where we focus on the significant other, the partner or the family at home, who plays also an important role. But let's start first with this, and maybe I will run out of time, so then I don't have time for that. Okay, let's start with that Dutch return to work system. And as you can see here, it started in 2002, but it's good to just go back a bit more earlier to the 1990s. At that time, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, he said or mentioned that the Netherlands was sick. And the reason why he said it was that at that time 1 out of 10 workers was on disability benefits. And it was at that time really easy also to apply for disability benefits. There was not really a big role for the employer. And it was more easy to go into that benefit instead of becoming, for example, employed, because then the difference in your salary was much larger. So overall, the idea was if you are becoming older or you have developed a chronic disease and you have reduced work capacity, then the easiest way out is to apply for disability benefit. And if you received it at that time, there were no and you don't have to do anything till the retirement age, so you just receive your 100% salary. But that was not doable anymore, and of course it will also be in this country, and also Emile, he told already about the challenges in Canada. It's similar here in the Netherlands, that the rising of the costs and also the labor market shortage, well, it asks for another policy which should be implemented. And one of the most important changes at that time was the Gatekeeper Improvement Act, or in Dutch we say the Wetsverbetering Poortwachter. And it was implemented in particular to on two things. It was to emphasize the role of the worker, him or herself, but also of the employer. And it was a shared responsibility. So, and I will explain that later a bit more about what the responsibilities are. But for the first change was also that before this act, the return to work process took 1 year, and then you can apply for disability benefits. And now it changed into 2 years. So with 2 years' time to do all you could do to bring people back to work. And after 2 years, it's still now the case, you can apply for disability benefit at the Social Security Institute. But in these 2 years, as I said, there's a shared responsibility to do everything, to put all the efforts in the return to work process. And first of all is that the employers had to pay the wage for these 2 years. So that's, of course, a lot of money. But that's not the only, because it's not only the financial incentive, but they developed also a scheme of action. On the next slide, I will show all these actions which should be taken by the worker and the employer together. And this is guided by the Occupational Health Service, which is a private organization. So there are several occupational health services across the Netherlands, and the employer is obliged to have a contract with an occupational health service, but they can change, of course, every year they can decide, okay, we will move to another one. But strict, it is necessary that there's always an occupational health service where, as I said, an occupational health physician is working, but also some other professionals, which are important for the return to work process. And it can be a sanction, which means that the Social Security Institute not only do the disability assessment, but they also assess the quality of the return to work process. So it also assess if the worker and or the employer put all the efforts into that process to hopefully succeed in bringing the worker back to work. If not, so if there's, if not, the worker did not do anything what he should do, and or the employer, then there can be a sanction, and the sanction can be a financial sanction, or that the assessment for disability claim will be postponed for another year. So then they have extra time. So here you can see all the gatekeeper activities in a nutshell. And we start with in week 0. So as at the time a worker is reporting to the supervisor that he is feeling sick and he will not be at work. Well, then it will take a couple of weeks, so he's already registered in the systems. But after, if it takes more than 4 to 6 weeks, then the worker will be invited to the occupational physician for an assessment. And the physician will look at the limitations, but also the possibilities the worker still has. So he will report about what the impact of the health condition or the disease is on functioning, and what the limitations are which should be taken into account. For example, energy deficits or concentration problems. So all this kind of information is included in a report which is sent to the supervisor and also the worker, but also to the supervisor. And then in week 8, they are responsible, the worker and the supervisor, to make a return to work plan. And in which they describe what activities will be undertaken, both by the worker and the employer. Then it looks like that nothing is happening till week 42, but that's not true. Every 6 weeks, the worker and the supervisor need to be at least 6 weeks to be in contact and talk about the progress which has been made and or the things which should be done. And if needed, the occupational physician can be contacted and can be asked for help, both by the worker and by the supervisor. Well, then I already mentioned week 42, reporting the Dutch Social Security Institute so that they are aware that there is someone on long-term sick leave. So that's the first signal to that institute. Because if there's a 1-year sick leave, then there will be a first-year evaluation by the Social Security Institute. And they will also give advice if it's, well, about the quality of the return to work activities which has been undertaken. But also they can say, okay, you have to do this more, or you should focus more on these kind of aspects. If still someone is not returning back to work, then we're in the 2nd year, or almost there. Then you can see there is a final evaluation of the return to work plan. So the employer and the worker are, or the employer has to make that final evaluation with input of the worker, and then they send it to the Social Security Institute for a disability claim assessment. And then at the end, there's the assessment itself, where the whole document, all the files, the reports will be assessed, and of course there will also be an assessment by the insurance physician within 1 hour interview with the worker. So this is, but for now, what I will tell more about is on the first 2 years, so on this process, and in particular, we are interested to get a better idea about the role of the employer in these 2 years. Before doing that, just to get an idea, what is the impact of the gatekeeper? Well, just a couple of years later on, you already saw the effect. It was a positive effect or impact in seeing that less people applied for disability benefits. So 40% more returned to work in these 2 years. And it was also found out that it was clear that this act also helps the employer to take their role and their responsibility. However, it was also found out that there were large differences between employers, and it was not clear what the difference made. Maybe there was some difference on sector or on the size of the company, but no clear idea about how it works in real practice. So that's what we decided in collaboration with the occupational health services and the social security. They helped us with doing this project, but we started a 4-year project of a PhD student. Oh, I hope you can see her. Her picture is just here, but she's really important, of course. Joke Jansen, and she finished it, but they did a mix of studies, started with a literature study, and then in particular, she did some great work on doing interviews with both employers but also with workers, and she did a survey study which she used the data to get a better idea about the different types of support. I will not go into each study separate, but I will just use the results to tell you what the findings were. And to start with the different types of employer results. We found out what we did, or what she did in particular, it was to do all these interviews with the employers and with workers or with supervisors, but no, with employers which were supervisors, case managers, human resource managers. So it can be at different levels within at employer level, and also across the Netherlands and with different companies. So it was really a large sample with a lot of diversity. And she used these interviews and asked in particular for success stories. So we wanted to know what did you as supervisor or employer contribute to the successful return to work of a specific worker, and or we asked the workers what the employer, what kind of support they offered and what was really helpful. And we categorized that in 3 types of support. We call it instrumental support, emotional support, and informational support. And I will go into more detail on the next slide for each type of support. But just to get a first idea, what we mean by instrumental support is the formal, so the work accommodations. I will show also on the next slide, but these are the well-known and often used work accommodations like changing work tasks or reducing working hours or work from home. These kind of often formal work accommodations, they are organized or they are formulated at organizational level. But we also found the importance of the informal support, and I will show you some examples on the next slides. Then about the role of the emotional support, the themes which we identified were encouragement, empathy, and understanding. And informational support it was about giving information about laws and regulations. It was really often, we heard that it was really difficult to understand the role of the worker in this whole gatekeeper process and what activities should be undertaken and who is responsible for what. So here also the supervisor or employer can be helpful, and also telling more about what kind of interventions are possible, which can be offered or by the employer and his insurer, or by the within the healthcare organization or healthcare system. So, but what kind of interventions there, the supervisor can also play an important role. Well, to start with the first one, so this was stated as by the employees as really important, what they can offer as support. The reduction working hours, changing work tasks, well, ergonomic equipment, so offering another desk or chair, working from home, flexible work schemes, modified work tasks. So if people have cognitive problems to concentrate, then you can maybe sometimes change the work task and just delete these kind of tasks. And or adaptation of the work environment. For example, now the lights are really on me. And that can, of course, be a problem if you have problems with kind of light or with sounds and these kind of things. We also heard that the provision of work accommodation is not always as easy as you might expect. The things they were mentioned were that it is costs a lot of time, and the efforts also which should be undertaken to find out what kind of work accommodations can be offered, what is allowed within our organization, but also what fits to the needs of the worker. Sometimes it's more like trial and error, and they say that takes sometimes too much of their time, and then it's easier just to find a new job than trying to accommodate the worker. But also the difference between companies show that the availability of job functions, for example, we also do a lot of research within construction work, and then it's difficult, what kind of other functions are available, and also the type of work tasks, whether it is possible to modify these tasks. So these were mentioned as important barriers to accommodate. Even if they want, it was often difficult and found as barriers to provide these kind of accommodations. Well, here is just an example related to that type of work tasks. It shows whereas in an office you can still easily just work 3.5 hours. In a production line we work in blocks until break time. I can easily call in an agency worker for half a day, for example, but I can't call in an agency worker for just 1.5 hours a day. This was one of the quotes which were mentioned to explain that it might be difficult to just change the work task. I just put in this slide, and I could not follow all the presentations, only yours, of course, Emil. But I saw somewhere it was about COVID, and we also did a study on COVID over the last years, and we really started early, which we already have a large cohort study in the northern part of the Netherlands, and we were it was possible to include some questions which were about the role of the employer. And I think that this is a good example what we also heard related to other conditions. Here it is related towards COVID. First of all, it was really interesting to see that here it was a survey to the workers who were on sick leave due to COVID, that about more than 70%, so really high percentage, I think, they said that they feel supported by their employer. However, what it also showed that it was really difficult for the employer to accommodate workers if it was necessary. So here on top, you see that the reduction of work tasks and flexible work schemes and the reduction of working hours. Well, actually this is also what we often heard from others in other studies related to other diseases, that this is really easy just to accommodate, that you just say, okay, you have a full-time job, but it is fine if you just go home for 20 hours a week, just be only on in the morning, it's fine. Well, of course, that is fine for a short time, but at the end it is, a loss of productivity, but also it's not the solution for longer time to keep these people at work. But for example, modifying work environment or changing tasks, that was the percentages were much lower. Then in this, the study about from Joke, we also looked in different groups of workers. Here you can see high educated, low educated, so these two bars are related to low educated workers. So we ask employers about the possibilities to provide work accommodations, and if it's more difficult for lower educated than higher educated, or if it is a physical or a mental problem. It's a bit confusing because this asks about the possibilities. So the higher, you should actually look over here, that this part says, okay, to a moderate to a high degree, we can offer or we can provide the work accommodations. So in particular for higher educated, this is a larger percentage in comparison to the lower. And when we compare between physical and mental, we see in the higher educated workers group that there is a difference which cannot be found in a lower educated. So for mental problems, both in higher educated jobs with the high skilled workers, people with mental disorders, the employers found it more difficult to provide work accommodations in comparison to somatic or physical problems. We also found, and that is related to the previous slide, some characteristics which are not only about the type of workers, so low and high educated, or the type of disease or health problem, but we also found out that there were more opportunities to provide work accommodations in larger organizations, which will not surprise you, I think, so because there are more jobs, it's easier also to find to modify jobs, but also in the public in comparison to private sector, and that I already mentioned the percentage of high in organizations where the percentage of most people are higher educated workers. They also mentioned where do we see potential. Well, then, and I already mentioned that example, there should be different job functions available within an organization. If not, then it's really difficult to find solutions if you want to change jobs. Also, it asks whether the type of work can be easily modified so that you can create a new job or a new function. And that is also really important if you want to emphasize that it should be really valuable work. So we often see also in the Netherlands that they just find solutions, but at the end it's just that someone is at work but just is bringing coffee to everyone, or is just doing not the real work what is expected, and then at the end is also not a valuable job for themselves. Well, and the potential also, and that differs also between companies, is if the employee, the company is willing to financially invest in finding these or implementing these kind of work accommodations. Well, then I will continue with the informal support. So that's we still put that within the same part. So it's related to work accommodation, but here it is not officially organized. So what we found, and that was really important, or mentioned also, that these kinds of informal support, in particular from colleagues or from supervisors, which are not well structured, can also be really helpful. And here you can have 2 quotes. The first one is a positive one to explain why it can be really helpful, which say that, and then if more people are doing the same, then you can arrange that colleagues can take over for a while. That's what the case manager in a healthcare organization mentioned. But here also a warning, because at the end it can, in itself is not bad, but if that continues, then it can be also at the end it can have a negative impact, in particular on the co-workers, because then the healthy people maybe can drop out because they have to do more work. So that this can be really helpful in the beginning, but really important too, that at the end there should be a structured solution. Then we continue with the emotional support. So it's about, well, I think the example I gave myself is a good is an example at least. So how can you support your worker? Here it is to encourage and that you do understand, that you ask for their needs, that you are there, which we found out that it is helpful to adapt to new situations, that they feel safe, to also talk about what is happening, and that you can have really shared responsibility to think about what can be solutions, to go back to your own work, but can also be that at the end you have to find, the worker has to find another job. So then here also the supervisor can play a really important role. Other thing was also mentioned is the role of being protective. We heard this in particular also from workers, that sometimes it was in particular the supervisors who just say that setting boundaries. So if you just can come back to work, start with this kind of task, and then it is enough, you should go home and take rest, because in particular the motivated workers, they really want to speed up sometimes. So therefore the employer can also play an important role. Yeah, and here also two quotes, which explains from the HR manager to thinking with them and being much more encouraging, positive, that can be really important. And also about the protective role, here the worker explains that it can also be really helpful. And you mustn't go beyond your limits, and I think that is a really important finding as well. Then the third type of support, that is the informational support, and I already explained what it is about, so the rules and regulations. And we heard in the interviews that that is really often really difficult to find, what kind of information do you need, but also what steps do you have to make. And I will not go into too much in detail on this, but this is related, this aspect, to the concept of social insurance literacy, which has been developed by Professor Christian Stahl from Finland, and also work with him. And I think that this is also really important to realize. We also have it in the health setting, we call it health literacy. So, but it is about, then it is about your health situation or the disease and what you do with, for example, the medication, how it works out. But the overall thing is that it is on person level, that someone obtain, understand, and act on the information. So what do you have to do? Which steps do you have to make? Which forms do you have to fill in? And who should, to whom should it be sent? But also about the system around that person. So how can you make a system that it is a comprehensive system, and that it provides clear information? And we did in the Netherlands a survey study on that in the people, or in the sample of social security disability benefit claimants. And we found out that 1 out of 3 persons scored with a low or a limited literacy level, and that also heard from the professionals who work with these people. And it's not only the lower educated people, but it can also be all levels of education. Sometimes it's really difficult to understand what you have to do. In particular, it's really stressful. There's a lot happening in your situation, and then this is also taking a lot of energy and can be really stressful. So this is really important. I think also that to be aware of that and to think about also how the services you or we offer also to these people to help them. How can you simplify the information you give? And here some examples are given. Use more visual strategies, but also train supervisors or other professionals how to have the right communication with people with lower social insurance literacy, and also by checking if they understand, etc. So this is, I think, a really important part of the support as well. Then I will continue with the characteristics of employer support, because we were not only interested in the type of support, but also it was, well, actually we were not looking for this, but we found out that this was important, the timing of support. So we only have different supports an employer can offer, but it's also think about the timing, what is important. So for example here the instrumental support, so with the work accommodations, the formal one, that's relevant in all phases, but for example, the informal I already mentioned, so when co-workers just take over work, that is in particular an option in the first phase, when we, in this part, just after the onset of sick leave, just as a first solution. Then emotional support, which was mentioned as relevant in all phases. However, in the first phase, it is important because to get grip on the situation, then it moves into understanding the needs, and by, in particular, even if people return to work, that's staying in contact, staying engaged, because sometimes then there will still be problems. So also here, you as supervisor should be staying in contact also, and here emotional support is still relevant to offer. And about that informational support, well, I think you can imagine that this also changed. First, it focused in particular on what kind of activities and what is the role of the worker and also from the supervisor. And if it takes longer and you end up here, well, then in particular you can be really helpful by telling more about what will happen if you will apply for a disability benefit. What is about the assessment, and there also the worker really thinks that the supervisor can play an important role also in giving support on that. Well, it's not only about the employer or the supervisor. In our country, it's as I said and started, it is in particular the worker and the supervisor who are really closely connected. But that supervisor is, of course, working within an organization. And that also makes it a bit more, difficult or complex. And what we found out related to the interaction between the worker and the employer, related to what is good collaboration, is in particular, of course, well, here 4 things are mentioned. To have regular or frequently contact, can be by telephone, can be by email, but just stay in contact, because if that's there's no longer contact, it will be really difficult to come back and to be in contact again between the worker and the supervisor. And it should not only be these formal moments for which I show for the every 6 weeks or for making that return to work plan together, but also in between. It can be also really just informal contacts. Mentioned is the open communication, and this is also related to this the term of disclosure, and that it is if you just as a supervisor ask questions about the needs and the wishes, but also what is the impact of the disease of functioning on daily life. It's also really that it is a trustful environment where someone can tell about what he needs and wishes. And and also that mutual responsibility, explain as supervisor what the worker's responsibility is, but also what your own responsibility is, and also ask feedback on that, how you can improve or what the worker would like to have from you as a supervisor. Well, I just will continue shortly with showing, because as I said, it is not the worker and the supervisor, but it is depending on a lot of characters. It's not, and here it just shows some characteristics about what is a perfect supervisor, and here what is the perfect worker, who takes self-control, who is flexible, who thinks, okay, I know what to do, and I'm open for finding a new job or finding a modified job if that is possible. But in daily practice, it's often that there is not this kind of ideal situation. Also here on just below, the organizational characteristics where that supervisor and worker are both connected or working within this workplace. There are a lot of difference between culture, but also about flexibility of an organization, and also about networks. So if, which can be helpful if you cannot find a job within your organization, maybe someone can work at other organizations, then these kind of networks within or between companies can be really relevant. Well, as I said, in a real ideal work setting, this sounds really easy to do, but that's of course not the case. So we have to, there is the interaction between the worker, the supervisor, and also the context where someone is working in. And that will be my the last part of my presentation, because how to continue, because this just showed what kind of support might be relevant. And we just looked back, we asked the supervisors, human resource managers, the workers themselves, what kind of support can be successful. So this gives an idea about working elements, working mechanisms. But as I already mentioned, this is not always the case in real world. So we continued with another project, and where we, and that's, oh, I think she will be on the next slide, a picture of that student. But we started with, okay, if we think that self-control of the worker in that return to work process to take his own responsibility in these kind of activities and to communicate with the supervisor, what are the barriers they perceive which might be limit to take this self-control? Well, and it is these elements strongly, of course, but these strongly connect to the things I just present. So the knowledge, the limited knowledge on this legislation. But they also often find it really difficult and stressful to have, for example, that interview with the occupational physician after the 6 weeks of sick leave. They have no idea what to expect, what can they tell, what do the physician expect from them. So here is also struggle which do not help them to take self-control, for example, during that meeting with the physician. They often have no idea, this really stressful situation, they become sick, they were not able to go back to work at that time, but what are the possibilities, what is expected from them now, but also if they will not recover, what then will be the consequences if they have limited work capacity, and what if it's not longer possible to do their own job. We also saw it's really important in taking self-control, and I already mentioned it in the beginning, is another project we do is about the role of the home situation. Often we heard that the decision to return to work is made at the kitchen table. So if someone with, for example, low back pain has, and he wants to go back, but his, wife, in this case, can also be the other way around, says, no, it hurts too much, you should not go back to work because that's the reason why you have the pain, then it is maybe also better to focus on the partner in case of return to work, or at least to also invite the partner to be for the interviews. So you can also explain what the situation is. Sometimes we see that the partner, they have wrong illness perceptions and cognitions. That can be a really important barrier for the worker himself to go back to work. Well, when we talk about the barriers from the perspective of the supervisor, if we want to take a supportive role, here we see often that it is not that they are not want to do it, they are not motivated, but as I give my example by myself, no idea what to do. And they have limited knowledge or limited skills to take that important supportive role. They have no idea what kind of work accommodations they can offer, what's the way, how the organization has, what kind of work accommodation would be possible, but also other kinds of support. It often lacks about knowledge, and also they are not trained to do this, so there's also a lack of skills. And this ends up with, well, not really effective conversations between the worker and the supervisor. Often happens, and that's important too. How can we improve that? Well, and here also just below Bibi de Mul, she just started last year as a new project where we try to gather, is a co-creation with several employers, but also with return to work companies, so the case managers, the occupational health services, and we think together how can we intervene on this, what kind of interventions. And that is this study strengthening both the worker's role, but also of the supervisor. And we are really wanted to integrate it because it is really linked to each other. Well, what we do, and of course this, you can not read it, but you should not read it because it's in Dutch. But it just showed the easiest way how we try to use these kind of visualizations, fact sheets, and things. This is for the worker, to explain what will happen, what will be, for example, the aim of the first meeting with that occupational physician. How can you prepare yourself? What kind of questions can you ask or will be asked? And we also, this is all, this kind of information they will get access to, which is part of a toolbox. And we also use movies, they can just show it. It's also related to that element about the social security literacy. So also for people with lower literacy, they can also use the videos or the movies, and they can have a look at that. And we have 2 additional consultations, and that is done by an external person who just helped the people to prepare for the things they really have to do, so for these formal activities. We just will start after the summer, so we now have prepared this all, and the real implementation and evaluation will start after summer. And for the supervisor, we, of course, with asking them what they need, we developed we developed a web-based platform, and there we they collected all kind of best practices on work accommodation, so they can learn from each other. And also during the next years, they can just add, it is their platform, so they can add also other kind of best practices, but also they can find knowledge and experiences from other supervisors on this web-based platform. Also examples of kind of work accommodations, and well, this is developed in collaboration with them. And there's a trained, we call it a return to work advisor. And within the larger companies, we are doing this project on national level within the healthcare sector and within construction work. And the construction work sector, there are just smaller companies. So there's a branch organization, and there, in this case, the return to work advisor is located at that level. So the smaller companies do not have to train their own advisor, but they can just use that at branch level. But these trained advisors can help the supervisors and also at the employer level, on the human resource management level, to think about how can you accommodate the workers, what kind of needs do they have and what would be possible, not only within their own organizations, but they also form a network of organization to find, okay, if you cannot work longer in this sector, maybe you can be trained and follow an education program to start in another job. So that's what we now will do in the next years. Hopefully, well, to skill up, what was also the key word in the presentation of Emil Tompa, and I think here also to skill up not only the skills of the worker, also the supervisor, but also the organization within they work, and that ask for an integrated approach. Okay, I would like to end my presentation with this take-home message. It just gives a short summary about the things I just present to you, the different types of support, but also the type and timing, which may depend on the phase of the return to work procedure. And the characteristics, not only from the supervisor, but also from the worker and the organization, that's linked to the level of communication and collaboration in the shared responsibility they have in the return to work process. And which my final slides were about, the new strategies, interventions we now have developed and will implement in the next years, together with many organizations, just to find out if this skill up interventions will help to prevent that workers will involuntarily leave the labor market, but we can stay at work till reaching retirement age. Thank you for your attention.